One of you is the host. There you go.
Awesome. Got it.
Yes. Perfect. I'm just adding a few more people from the waiting room. And then we'll get started. Christina, is there any logistical items that we need to cover before we jump in?
Nope, I'll just monitor the chat, and if anyone has any technical issues, I might, interrupt you, like if someone can't hear you or something, but really here to kind of help be that technical support lead.
Fantastic. Well, we appreciate you. Okay, let's get started then. I'm so excited, and we have like so many slides to go through. So hopefully we make it to the end, but please like interrupt us. Like, we want this to be discussion based. If you have a comment, if you have a question, if you want us to clarify something or give examples, we would love for you to unmute yourself and speak up, raise your hand, use the chat, whatever you feel is best. And I always like to recommend people connect with each other. You're all here today, which probably means you're experiencing similar pain points. So use this as a good place to have build out that network if you're looking to do that. I'm actually going to drop my LinkedIn link in the chat. Feel free to connect with me as well. I'd be happy to chat with you after this workshop and nerd out more. And I know Drew would probably say the same thing.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, Drew, do you want to start with a quick round of intros?
Yeah, for sure. Just drop my LinkedIn in the chat as well. Hi, everybody. Drew Noel, Head of Professional Services here at MadKudu, working day in, day out, actually, with Hannah on our marketing and also on, of course, our ops. As well as advising MadKudu customers around ops. Surprisingly, it's crazy to say it, but 17 years in the space at this point, kind of going all the way back to the early days of Eloqua, Responses before that, and then Salesforce, and going to talk through a lot of different motions that are primarily platform agnostic today, but probably a little bit of Salesforce flavor more than anything else. So just wanted to say hello and excited to talk through mostly the technical side of things today. Wanted to make sure that we brought some takeaways that you could go and implement potentially if you don't have them already. So excited to jump into that. Hannah?
Awesome. Thanks, Drew. My name is Hannah Jacover. I'm Director of Demand Gen at MadKudu, and you're probably wondering what business is this of a demand generation person to be talking about such deep marketing operations processes. And that is because I have a background in an agency background, and for many, many years, also dating myself, I helped a variety of different types of companies build out these processes. So build out their lead management. We used to run workshops for them, take them through this process, either at a conceptual level and really providing the education, all the way through to developing the strategy and then executing it. So I love this topic. I can nerd out on it. I also love teaching this topic. I spent a lot of time teaching this topic to a couple different nonprofits like Green Fig University. So if you feel like my teacher voice is coming out, that's why. But yeah, excited to dive in, and I know everybody's at a different level within their organization. So I think, ultimately today, like our goal, and I'll skip ahead to our agenda, is, well, let me take a step back. This deck, rather, is really going to be your playbook from several different perspectives. So we know that lead management is all about aligning teams and ensuring that you can really have full ownership over the lead management process. But in order to get to that point, you really have to be able to provide a level of education to your teams. So you should be able to talk about lead management as the expert that you are. You should be able to rattle these things off to your team. And not only that, but then be the guide so that your team can then also do that. The marketing team can also do that. The sales team can also do that, because then we're getting deeper and deeper into conversations that actually matter more. Like, how do we increase revenue? And when we can eliminate the like very high level discussions, we can start thinking a little bit more critically about that number one goal. And then, as Drew mentioned, we also have lots of examples. So please steal these thoughts, steal these slides, and obviously tweak them to your process. But you'll see lots of different technical plays and examples throughout the deck that we hope can then also you can adopt those and use them in your process as you evolve your lead management. Okay, any questions? There's a chat. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. All right, let's charge ahead. So first, we're going to talk about some lead management fundamentals. And I think it's really important to always start with fundamentals, because everybody has a different definition. Everybody has a different outlook on what is lead management, why are we doing it? So it just kind of sets the stage, and we always need to be working from a foundational level and build up from there. So think about this too from the perspective of, again, you should be bringing this knowledge to your team. Part of marketing operations, and part of the reason why we see marketing operations roles now, I think, kind of exploding a little bit more, is because you have so much visibility and you have so much knowledge of the business. And it's really critical that in order to continue or to allow marketing ops roles to continue to evolve as we're seeing, that we then knowledge share. And that also will allow you to be seen as somebody who's adding extreme value to your organization. It will also allow you to have better alignment across teams, better relationships. You are viewed as a leader. I mean, all that good stuff. So again, the next few slides are going to really speak to the importance of lead management. And if you're feeling oh, it's a little bit high level, that's very intentional. Okay, so I have not changed this slide in so many years because I love this comic thing. Comic strip. I don't want to call it a strip. It's not a comic strip. It's I don't know. Anyways, it says we need a better system for handling these leads, a bigger box, perhaps. And it's funny because it's true, and sad, because it's actually the reality for a lot of organizations. Some of this stuff is yeah, duh, of course we need to be doing this, but so many people are not doing it, or they want to do it and they don't know how, or one team wants to do it and another team doesn't know how important it is. So if you think of it through the lens of marketing, for example, marketing's just hustling to generate as many leads, hopefully qualified leads as possible. And when that's successful, a lot of organizations, because they focus on that first, they get so incredibly overwhelmed because they didn't think about setting up a process to actually handle those leads and manage those leads. And you think about, wow, but once we generate the leads, what are we going to do with them? How do we make sure that operationally we can move them through this funnel that everybody talks about? But it can't just be this concept. We have to actually implement that. So it's really our job to identify what this process looks like and help others understand why it's important and how we can get there together.
I just want to know.
Please.
I was going to say, I just want to know which one of those boxes are the Glengarry leads. Not to basically date myself even further, but throwing it out there. Pink card.
Coffee is for closers. Yes, thank you, Christy.
Awesome.
See, we're all old here. Age is
okay,
a beautiful
awesome.
thing.
She's like Christy's upping me with 19 years.
Yes, by the way, Drew and I, like I said, we like to laugh, we like to have fun. You'll see us hopefully be silly, and I think that's important too. Bring this humor into your team. And I feel we've had a lot of success with alignment across teams, all jokes aside, because we bring this layer of authenticity, and we just like to build relationships and have fun. So I would say I should have added that to my tip slide at the end. Be yourself and have fun.
100.
Okay, so general definition of lead management. Hopefully everybody already knows this, but it's this overarching concept, right? And it involves essentially managing leads from the time they're generated at the top of the funnel or wherever they're coming in. And sorry, I'm just admitting somebody in the waiting room. So thinking about form fills, collecting lists of leads from a trade show, and then managing them all the way through to close sale, and hopefully even further, and every step in between. So we're really leaning on our technology to help us support these processes. You're no, oh, great information. Okay, yes, that's great. We love definitions, but like, what the heck does that actually mean? Like, when you bring that to your team and say, like, here's the definition of lead management, they're going to be like, yes, and I don't understand what that actually means. So here are the elements that kind of live under that lead management umbrella. And I always like to say lead management is not any one technology. It is a process supported by technology. And that goes for anything like ABM, you'll hear us say that, anything really, any of these like conceptual things, like there's not any one technology that defines lead management, but it can be supported by technology. And another thing is that these are shared initiatives. We know that not one person owns lead nurturing, not one person owns scoring, not one person owns lead routing. So that's why it's so important that we collaborate and we ensure that we're closely aligned, because at the end of the day, as we get deeper and deeper in these conversations, it allows us to work towards that one common goal, which if it's not revenue, then go home. Just kidding, but seriously.
Kick rocks.
Yeah. Make it revenue. But it helps us get there easier instead of like having all of these different disparate goals. When we have a seamless process in place, it allows us to clearly get to that revenue goal. And there's a number of things that we can do to make sure that this alignment is happening through each of these pieces. And we'll talk about a lot of these. We're not going to talk about all of them. Something like lead nurturing is not something we're covering. We're really kind of focused on today, probably like lead routing, statuses, service level agreements, metrics and reporting, because that's where I think this audience has like the skills and can bring the chops to really like amplify and optimize like those specific areas. However, this does kind of showcase that it's not just the job of marketing ops, right? It's the job of sales. It's the job of customer success. It's the job of marketing. So we all need to kind of work together. However, you have an opportunity to spearhead these conversations, and everybody, we have this marketing ops confessions series every week, and everybody's always asking, how do I showcase value? How do I showcase value? How do I better align my teams? This is how you do it. Okay, I'm just checking for questions. Drew, anything to add from you before we move on?
No, I think I just wanted to reinforce that point around the discussion today really being more around the process and the technology than it is around content necessarily. So it's a true ops session. It's not creative in its own right, but not a traditional definition of creative. So
yeah, I love that. Okay, so I threw this slide in here last minute. Sorry, Drew. Because I think it's important to understand, like, okay, if I do all of this, if I have a solid lead management process, or even if I make like tiny improvements to my lead management process, like what's that going to get me? A lot of things, but in terms of KPIs, here are some of the KPIs and just some, and we'll go over some of like how to get to like velocity, for example, later on. But here's some of the insights that then give you so much power and time as well, right? You're increasing productivity, so you're getting time back. You're able to use these as an opportunity to then showcase your value and justify the decisions or the plans that you have in place. So when you have these kind of insights, when you have the ability to bring these kinds of insights to the table, you're not only adding value in your role, but you're also enabling teams to move toward that bigger picture of, that one shared goal of more revenue. Speaking of alignment, yes,
One
it's
of
a
my
lot of
favorite
work.
scenes.
I know. Fully aligned. It's a lot of work, right? To get through all of this. It takes a lot of time. It's not going to happen overnight. It's lots and lots of hours. You might be the one person doing it, which is very frustrating. But if you stick with it, even just by starting to have these conversations, you're bridging a gap between sales and marketing, and you can immediately see a huge impact. And companies that are totally aligned generate 208% more revenue. 200, like that's a big deal. It's huge. And so you'll hear like marketing and sales, like how do we get more revenue? When I think that sometimes we ignore this part of the problem, and we immediately go to like tactics, like, okay, we should be thinking about different marketing tactics. Do we have the right content? Do we have the right audience? But I would first look at your foundation, right? Clean your house first and make sure that your process, the processes that you have in place are not the culprit of a leaky funnel. Because that, no matter what you do on the front end, is if you have problems within the funnel, it's going to completely, like, none of that will matter. So this is why it's so important. Okay, so here's just some additional benefits. This is a great slide for like obtaining buy-in. Why do we want to improve our lead management process? This is why. Screenshot this, send it to your boss. If you have a initiative that you want to get rolled out or get started on, this is a great way to communicate that's going to hit on marketing and sales goals, and really can like get them to understand why lead management is so important. So, and obviously, like as a marketing ops professional, like you kind of own all of these. And so this obviously like speaks to all of your goals, but we need to think beyond that. How do we be a better partner? How do we get the alignment and things like that? So thinking beyond that and putting yourself in the shoes of a marketing, your VP of marketing, your CMO, your VP of sales, like these are the things that they want to see happen. Because all of this is going to equal more revenue, more sales wins, more revenue. And it may seem obvious, right? Like, yes, 71% of sales professionals say closing deals is their top priority. Like, duh. But it's when you dig a little bit deeper into that, like they do understand that they need to improve the efficiency of the sales funnel in order to get to that goal. So like that top level goal is really obvious, but that secondary goal is actually supporting it. And so if we can focus on, okay, but we're improving the efficiency of the sales funnel to get there. And then you see all of this like increased productivity, which equals time. Time is the best gift you can give your team. The best gift. If you can gift your team time and space to do the things that they need to do and want to do, oh, sorry about that. I lost my sound for a minute. Okay, so let's move on and talk a little bit about lead management and the relationship to the funnel. So I like to very simply visualize this concept because we're talking about our funnel, right? We all know this. This could literally be any shape. I hear like LinkedIn arguments about like the shape of your funnel. Like, literally, you could have a viral loop.
Yeah, sure.
A donut. I don't care.
Yeah.
It could be a donut. I don't know how you make that work, but you could. A unicorn. How are you going to make it work? I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. A magnet. Like there's so much debate around the shape of your funnel. And guess what? It does not matter when you're talking about these things. Because at the end of the day, you still have to completely define what is inside of that. So if you have a donut, you still have to define every step and stage and what happens in between, like what are in between the layers. I mean, you could have all sorts of analogies here, but when people try to argue about like, oh, but my funnel looks like this, it doesn't matter when it comes to lead management, because you still have a responsibility to map out the various stages within that funnel or process or journey or whatever you want to call it. So I like to use the typical traditional funnel shape here because I think it makes the most sense when we're talking from a conceptual level. So just try not to get too hung up on that. And if anybody tries to argue with you about the shape of the funnel, send them to me. Drew, anything to add?
No, I was going to say there are, of course, I mean, hopefully you just don't have a higher number entering in at lower stages within the funnel, because that's just weird. But it more than anything, I think, we look at conversion ratios, we're looking at velocity and throughput. And that's why, I mean, I think, we go back to the traditionalist attitude of, having looking at the funnel as a literal funnel. So that's fine.
Yeah. And I think from an educational standpoint, like when you're talking to your teams, it's really an easy visual for them to understand that we need to have these clear, defined stages. And no matter what the source is of your demand gen programs, I'll also die on the hill that demand gen is a cloud that feeds the entire funnel, and demand gen is not like any one tactic. I'll fight someone on that one. But so it doesn't matter the source, like all leads are being nurtured, all leads are being scored throughout the funnel. And then each stage, by defining them, we're minimizing the amount of lost leads. And we're also ensuring that there's a clear handoff, so we can easily see at what stage there's this clear handoff is happening, when sales starts to work the lead. And so it becomes this really intelligent funnel because we have that visibility of being able to see exactly what's happening. And then we can kind of shift our focus, right? We can shift our focus to pinpointing like, ooh, this stage of the funnel is not performing well. And I now understand, I think I have the data, I have the insights to understand why. So instead of just having like, a whole assumption around what's happening generally, you can get very specific with some of the insights that lead management will allow you to have. This is a real statistic. I honestly can't believe it. It makes my stomach hurt. It's very sad.
Yeah.
And I think part of it too, and Drew, I would love your opinion, but I think part of this is honestly that there's a lack of education within organizations around why lead management is so critical. And that is why I think it's so important. And we have such an opportunity, you have such an opportunity as a marketing ops professional to fix that and close that gap. But yeah, Drew, what's your take?
I mean, I think looking across the conversations that I have on a regular basis, I think a lot of it actually, if we empathize with the fact that it comes down to a certain amount of accountability, and again, I think this is going to be a recurring theme in the discussion today, is taking responsibility for certain aspects of the throughput and the management of the velocity and execution within the funnel. It should be a joy, right? It's a privilege, like, as opposed to, like we have to make sure that this happens, or, I think that it really does come down to defining these things when they are known and then they're put in place. Yes, there's an agreement, and then it creates a social contract within the organization to kind of move forward according to those guidelines. And I think that's scary to some people, as opposed to it being like, oh, well, we have like this campaign, it gets treated that way, or we have this activity and, we kind of do whatever we do with that, and things enter in at different places and people kind of just get on with their own show. It's definitely, I think the key word in that statement is actually organization, right? It's like B2B organizations should have a funnel, depending on how organized you are overall as a business. And I think, as a marketing and sales organization, it's critical.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, it's obvious why companies that struggle in this area are going to have a really difficult time quantifying the success of their programs. And not only that, it's impossible to pinpoint like what may be driving inefficiencies, which, is just kind of like a snowball rolling down the hill. And that's where then we get a lot of finger pointing of like, oh yeah, it's the quality of the leads. It sucks from sales. No, like you're not following up with the leads. And, oh, but how do you know I'm not following up with the leads? I mean, it just can blow up and then we get sidetracked and we are distracted. So moving on, I'm not spending more than 5 seconds on this slide. We know the buyer's journey. It's just like, here's a reminder of what it is and that I'm going to talk about it.
Okay. Good talk. Okay.
Yes, good talk. The reason I bring it up is because I think it's extremely helpful, especially when we're trying to educate the team and trying to make these decisions and trying to define these things, to layer in some mapping that is universally understood to some extent. So when we have our buyer's journey stages, and then underneath it we layer in our lead management stages. So this is essentially like that same funnel that we saw, except for flipping it on its side, and we're just kind of like blocking out those stages. But we know now, and we can see very clearly, that when somebody's in the awareness stage of the buyer's journey, they're likely just kind of entering our lead management funnel and trying to define their problem. And as they move along in their journey, they are also moving along in our lead management funnel in hopes of like, okay, becoming an MQL, becoming an SQL, becoming a closed one. So we ideally want to make sure that we're mapping our activities and anything that we're executing, and always have this buyer's journey in mind. And I'll talk a little bit about defining these lead stages. I think that, hopefully, and I'll ask, maybe you can share in the chat, and we have some other questions too, but share in the chat just kind of like, yes, we have well-defined lead stages, or no, we don't, or, yeah, they could be improved. So we'd love to hear kind of like how sophisticated you are in terms of lead stages. So share that in the chat. And I think that like when it comes to, oh, go ahead, Drew.
I was just gonna say, and also not to point the finger at yourself necessarily, like how sophisticated your organization is possibly.
Yeah.
Because again, it's a lift. So
yeah, no judgment zone. And it's a lot of work. It really is. So yeah, when it comes to actually defining these stages, like every organization is going to be so incredibly different. So when you look at that and say, well, that's not right, there is no wrong way. Like it really is dependent on your organization. You could have a very complex sales cycle. You could have a very timely, long sales cycle. You could have a very complex sales team and multiple tiers, and SDRs and BDRs and AEs and SEs. And I mean, like there's so many complexities and factors that go into this, which is why I try to use the simplest version for a company that, say is just really getting started with lead management and wants to set up something that just kind of makes sense to as they evolve and they can grow with them. So I like to start at the simplest form, and then depending on the factors of all of those things that I mentioned earlier, how complex your organization is, then you can start to layer in, okay, maybe we need these additional stages. Maybe we need these MQL cohorts. Maybe we need, all of these lead statuses. So just keep that in mind as we walk through the deck today.
I will say I'll be slightly more salty on that one and just say that there is one wrong thing that you can do, which is put sales qualified lead in front of sales accepted lead, because that doesn't make any sense. Like, no. and I've actually seen that at an organization that will remain unnamed. So please don't do that.
I have sadly seen it at several organizations that will remain unnamed.
Okay, cool.
So you're not alone. Okay, so I'm going to pass it to Drew because we have our first technical play.
Hey, right on. So Tama, what you'll see is these are general points and instructions or recipes, if you will, that I've described for you around how to configure at a conceptual level the various things that assist with each of these aspects that we're talking through, or these concepts that we're talking through today. So the first point is around campaign attributes and content tagging, and really managing and being able to see the engagement across the buyer journey, and making sure that we see how that actually impacts the funnel overall. One activity that I see a lot of organizations talk about but have a hard time actually executing on is content tagging and mapping content to the buyer journey. However, if you evaluate any piece of content, a web page, an email, a white paper, a product sheet, all of those pieces more or less fall into one of those particular stages of the buyer journey based on voice and CTA. First action to do is to really go through and map and tag that content to the buyer journey overall. And it's as simple as getting a list of those links and resources, those various assets, and then just categorizing them in a spreadsheet. So that's the first step, right? Then in terms of operational tooling that we can actually put in place is to, add a buyer journey stage as and it says customer field, that's a typo, but it's custom field on the campaign object in the CRM or as a tag in your MAP, especially Marketo as an MAP, like accommodates those tags around programs, and then basically allowing for awareness, consideration, decision, basically mapped there. Then also a recommendation that you could have a custom UTM parameter around the buyer journey stage, adding that to various links for external resources across your paid channels, content links and emails, and then looking at creating a program or a campaign in the MAP to listen for those tags inbound, and then updating campaign membership in the CRM based on those tags. So as you get engagement, really being able to map and see like the total unit count of engagements across the buyer journey. So just a few ideas around what you can put in place at a technical level to accommodate that. Then in terms of reporting on that, it would be campaigns with campaign members in an SFTC report. You don't have to tag everything. These are a lot of considerations around how to structure things initially. So some considerations are you don't have to tag everything. Start with high volume assets first. Keep the campaign hierarchy useful. Like try not to get into like, okay, well, we're going to have a really like a 5 variable naming convention that basically, allows for us to like do a whole bunch of like parent campaigns and, grouping and all that stuff. Try to keep it as simple as possible. My recommendation in terms of just managing noise within the CRM and also within your campaigns in the MAP is to only track campaign response if you can help it, and save yourself the noise of how much is actually going out, because you're going to have a lot of those top level funnel metrics anyway in other places, and then don't be afraid to track additional actions within a period of time in additional membership status. And I think that's an interesting point to give you additional detail within campaign reporting. Sometimes a combination of actions within a period of time monitored by a program in the MAP and then updating membership status within your CRM is really useful, especially if you're looking for maybe additional depth of conversion or action. So wanted to call that out as kind of the first aligned technical play and some of the things that you can do to operationalize the concepts we've been talking about so far.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to ask about, and I get the listening for tags and not having too complex of a parent-child campaign association.
Yeah.
How are you, and I've done it with like a custom object in Salesforce, but I'm just kind of curious, how do you think about the organization of campaign? How do you do campaign influence against this? Do you go in and actually bring in all the tags into a different custom object so you're able to see all the different UTM parameters that somebody's engaged with?
Mhm.
Because they can be a member of a campaign, but you want to know, like, was that from paid social? Was that campaign driven by email? Was that campaign driven by going to the website directly? How do you think about organizing that?
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen it organized two different ways. So if you organize your channels as the campaigns, and then really like your assets as a potential destination, and then you have those links that are driving those channels, then passing through to specific destinations, and then basically you're getting that UTM parameter there. That would be one way to organize it. And then in terms of the attribution or the tracking of what particular campaign or activity drove motion within the funnel, actually have a point of discussion on that a little bit later on. So if you'll permit me, Christy, I'll hold on that and actually talk about that in a few slides.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, and I think one thing also to add before we move on is thinking about like how your map is actually driving a lot of this too, right? Like, so for example, if you're using HubSpot, like you can capture those UTMs and build a workflow that is listening for those and then is sending them to the campaigns, to the child campaigns. Same with Marketo. So I think just thinking about too that there's a way to flow it through from your map. Like you don't have to say, how do I get everything into Salesforce first? Like you can leverage your marketing automation tool first, because that's probably the first place that these people are hitting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Depends. It really depends. I've had setups with the map first. I've had setups with Salesforce first, and Trey is the middle person back to the map. So it just depends.
Yeah, it's always an exciting scenario, but yeah, I think I hear that pain, Christy, for sure. It's and that is always scary when you have things kind of hitting the CRM directly, if you can't channel them through your MAP. And yeah, I think the solution that I propose is actually a little bit later on, so I'll cover that in a minute.
Perfect.
Cool.
Yeah, and so this slide is somewhat high level, but it's really just kind of to again capture the fact that like this is a shared initiative. And the one thing I don't love about this is that we know that marketing can span deeper in the funnel and vice versa. So there's not always a stopping point, especially if you're leaning a lot on, if your team's leaning on ABM, for example, like you might have marketing involved pretty far along in the funnel. However, the actions associated with that are likely going to be the responsibility of sales, in terms of like thinking about like lead statuses and moving that lead, operationally speaking, on to the next stage. However, like this definitely leads us into a discussion around lead routing and lead assignments. So we'll have a technical play on that next, but just good to know that there is ownership over these certain stages, and that then allows us to kind of start setting the stage for service level agreements of what's happening at this stage and who's responsible for the things that need to happen, which we'll talk about soon.
Yeah, and here we go. So yeah, maybe a bit of a product plug, but I think it's the right audience. Just in terms of ops and instrumentation around lead routing and assignment. Yeah, lean data. I mean, I've used it in a couple of different ops stacks that I've managed directly. really, I mean, you could use your CRM assignment rules, right? But really what I wanted to talk about is just in terms of the considerations and the things that we want to track in terms of routing and assignment. Looking at trigger logic to bridge from the MAP to the CRM, especially for PLG shops, is a big thing that we run into. What's the logic there? What actually causes something to move from the MAP to the CRM? I'm a big fan of using queues to manage ownership and visibility, especially if you do have capacity within your CRM in terms of just database volume. That way you can kind of have a one-to-one MAP CRM map. And then that's more of like an enterprise, like or traditional enterprise play there. But, keeping that one-to-one mapping between those two systems, and then using queues to manage the ownership and visibility, and maybe holding things back if they're not ready to be assigned to reps directly, using queues for that management. And then tracking the history on the lead owner in the CRM I'm a big fan of that, as well as looking at date stamp workflows for the last lead assignment date. So that really shows your movement to the sales organization, and really reporting around that, in terms of filtering down to changes on lead owner, in a lead history report, grouping based on the last lead assignment date, and or the status date stamps, which we will cover off on later, which is probably the number one way you can get closer to a BI aspect within your basic lead and contact objects. And then graphing by the new value and edit date for relative routing parity comparisons. I think this is important, and it's something that has a tendency to get overlooked, but it's super important to the sales organization. And eventually we'll kind of come back to you if you don't think about, all right, how many leads are we routing to individual reps? How are those routing rules impacting the overall parity across AEs, SDRs, et cetera. And really, what does your territory volume end up looking like in the end? So things to consider on lead routing and assignment there. Christy, see your question on Slacker troops. In terms of tracking issues, I'm a super big fan of routing to Slack in terms of notifications, and also using it as a communications platform. But in terms of tracking issues specifically, I'm curious like what the use case would be.
Yeah, so like if you have a lead owner, so we've set up some instrumentation with Robolog, with robots to Slack. Okay. But one of the things that I'm wondering is like things where you might have somebody forgot to reassign leads to an inactive Salesforce user, right? So SDR left the team, right? Mm-hmm. Things like that. Things like just anything that might happen that might be an error or like a flag, like if something doesn't happen. Say, for instance, you're setting up the lead to contact conversion based on accounts, and that just for whatever reason doesn't happen or doesn't trigger out of lean data, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it is a point of visibility. I hear you on that. I would say the best thing to do there is, again, the audit trail approach, which is unfortunately like it comes down to like creating a date stamp and creating a log of what that change would be, and then automating the reporting in a certain way so that, but then ultimately like you kind of need a set of eyes on those exceptions. In terms of doing it in real time, you could potentially you could probably set up workflow rules around the people object in Salesforce, right? So if a lead is assigned and you end up having that person is marked as inactive, or I mean, it probably will error out in that particular scenario. But if you look at creating some rules around if you have an exception where it gets routed to an individual that it shouldn't be routed to, well then send a notification directly to an administrative person, or somebody who has admin rights on the system.
Yeah, we
Okay.
actually do this with like we have a general lead owner for kind of like a different queue, but I know that if there are certain types of MQLs that are assigned under that owner, I get alerted. So I can then go in and make sure that it's rerouted properly, or the ownership is transferred properly. And you can do that, like we do it with basic workflows with like HubSpot, but like again, like the technology that you can use to build those out is, there's lots of options. I think the number one thing to think about is like reducing noise, right? Like how much noise is too much noise, and just knowing, like documenting like what's the most important thing that happens. And if that doesn't happen, like, okay, let's set up that alert. But having sort of like a conscientious approach to that, to make sure that like you're not adding more noise that needs to, because that can get overwhelming super quickly.
Yeah, this isn't for sales. This would be for ops. This would be just
Yeah.
notifications for ops.
Yeah, for sure. There's a question, Drew, from Lillian, if you could speak more of the trigger logic to bridge map and CRM.
Yeah, so in terms of that approach there, Lillian, is really what causes a record to move from simply sitting in the MAP to the CRM. So I've seen this done a few different ways, where if you have the actual MQL status being the trigger to push the record over to the CRM, right? Because we don't want to keep things in there earlier on. I've also seen at very ABM focused shops where maybe you have a motion that's very focused in terms of the core adoption of a platform being around, okay, cool, like let's look at the organic conversion to paid at the SMB, or like the natural adoption level, that not being of interest to the sales organization because they're focused on the enterprise play and an ABM approach. So they're almost waiting for there to be a critical mass of users or a specific volume of activity within an account or a domain before that's actually pushed over to the CRM. So that can be governed, just in terms of what actually ends up over in whatever CRM you're using, namely Salesforce for the most part, but making sure that you are controlling that based on the logic that is amenable to your sales organization primarily. And also will potentially save you a lot of money, especially if you have millions upon millions of users in your MVP. So.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes the trigger logic is literally create date, like there's some people will pass everything over, but in that case, and we'll talk about this, it's really important that there's like a designated lead status for those types of leads. You can control sales, and we know where they are in the stage, and we know who should be working them, or what should be what type of activity should be happening. Okay, let's dive into lead stages and status definitions and talk a little bit about that. So this is a really good slide. Again, if you are trying to kind of roll this out and develop different definitions for your lead stages or optimize your process, this is a really good way to kind of document that and make sure that everyone is aligned in terms of what the lead stages look like in relation to the buying journey and also ownership. So it's kind of pulling it all together, and it will allow for both, your marketing and your sales teams to like really understand what should be happening. And you can no longer say, oh, we don't know the definition of an MQL, or sales thinks an MQL is different than marketing definition of an MQL. And you should really be driving those conversations to make sure that everything is very well defined and everybody has alignment around those definitions. We don't create these definitions in a vacuum. It's done together. We would run like full day workshops with sales, marketing ops, and sometimes customer success to make sure that all of this makes sense and that everybody has an opportunity to be heard in terms of why we are creating these definitions and what they should be. So it's a collaborative effort. And again, we'll point out that these stages are different across various organizations. So your org might have some additional stages here. You might have some things moved around as long as sales qualified lead is not before sales accepted lead. But yes, there's opportunity to use this as kind of a baseline and then evolve it according to your organization.
Cool. So I'm going to actually jump down and answer the question from Christy a little bit earlier in terms of attribution. So one of the best things that both Hannah and myself have had set up in our CRMs in the past is simply stamping probably the most critical juncture of which campaign occurred last before MQL. So effectively stamping the MQL campaign to the lead or the contact record so that if that goes on to convert, those values can be passed and mapped onto the opportunity potentially as well. It does require Apex in order to inventory the actual campaign memberships that are present for that lead or contact. In various consulting scenarios, I think I've engaged with developers. If you don't have a developer on staff, it can cost anywhere from like 2,500 to like 5 Gs, depending on like but in terms of putting that in place, but it also gives you probably your primary true like marketing source, to push that through. And then to like get a meaningful campaign that actually pushed something over the threshold to MQL. So that's a key recommendation that we have. It's super useful and also allows you to really get an idea of which campaigns are really driving real marketing engagement. That being said, it is still like last touch before MQL. So that's basically what it is, but it's also not like last before opportunity, which we generally think is too deep in the funnel. If you're going to have a single juncture, that's probably one to look at.
If you wanted to do even distribution rather than last, and you want the whole.
Yeah. So
how do you think about doing that? One of the ways I've done it before is to use a custom object in a map, and I've done this with like MadKudu and I've done it with Eloqua in the past, but then to log all the MQLs into a custom object. And then instead of using a contact ID or a lead ID or an email address, because that as the unique key, I've used like the campaign member ID, so that I would have like a full record of all those different touch points.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that I've seen as well is a demand funnel record. Like if you're looking to create something, again, I think the best solution you would have, like, again, if finance is not an issue, I think having a tool like Visible is a great option.
For MadKudu, yeah, it depends if it works. It's not going to work with it. Yeah, and all the maps it works with.
Yeah, but if you're going to try to create something that you can log specifically, and maybe you want to narrow down those particular points that you're really monitoring, you could go with a custom object and map that too. So yeah, I totally agree on that, Christy.
That's what and then also Pardot, of course, has, and I think Salesforce Marketing Cloud too. I've been through a lot of acquisitions recently, so I've had the joy of working in like 5 5 maps at once. Pardot actually has
Sorry.
like a campaign influence model
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's owned by Salesforce.
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's a lot of different tools either in advanced modules of MEPs, but just simply like if you're not tracking any of those particular touch points or critical touch points, probably the most important is that MQL. And then calling out too in terms of tracking progression through the funnel overall, making sure that you have date stamps or a date time field for each status in the funnel. Maybe even looking at first and most recent for PQL, MQL statuses, just because there is a potential loop there for rejection, remarket, disqualification. And then also setting up trigger campaign processes in the MAP or the CRM to basically monitor and monitor those changes in the status and then stamp those dates accordingly. One of the in terms of configuring the reports, it's grouping or basically cohorting the stages by the date stamps and then seeing relative movement through the funnel over time. That way you can also group further by the campaigns, as we mentioned, if you are inventorying those and stamping them, and then seeing the campaigns that push the threshold most. So
and then the date stamping along with statuses and whatnot is also going to set you up for monthly funnel reporting. I mean, like we were able to cut down on the time of our reporting by, so much just by implementing some of these things, especially date stamping. So it's an easy process, definitely some setup. And now it's an easy process every month, every quarter when we're looking at reporting to go back in and look at our funnel. Okay, so some suggested lead stage or examples that you can consider. Again, like some of these are fairly obvious, like lead, what does that mean? But what's important is this documentation, right? Get it defined and understand what's supposed to happen at that stage. And then this can then sort of be a living and breathing document. Like we've made, these are actually our lead stages, but we've made changes, right? And so now we can understand, go back in and make sure that we're tracking those changes in agreement with everybody. And something to note here that I know Drew will talk about is, and again, this kind of goes back to our conversation around having different lead stages or splitting different lead stages. So we have, for example, different types of MQLs. Not all MQLs are created equal. They come from different places. We understand that they have higher propensity to close in some cases based on a number of factors. So because of that, we can then reprioritize them and split them up into various types of MQL. So here you see we have a hand raiser MQL versus something like a natural MQL. How you get there is obviously dependent on your tools, what data you have available to you, and how you can really get that 360 view of those leads. So if you understand the fit, for example, of a lead, how it meets your ICP criteria, and this kind of gets into a little bit of like lead scoring and qualification, obviously, you can then determine what those different types look like. So all in all, what you want to be doing with your team is documenting these lead stages if you haven't already, but work through them. I mean, these are not stagnant. We see changes happening all of the time. So we want to make sure that by having these stages, we're going back and we're looking, okay, but our low fit hand raisers, which is kind of counterintuitive to say, our low fit hand raisers, we don't consider them to be MQLs. They are requesting demos, but the conversion rate, when we put it all together, the conversion rate was inaccurate, because we really need to look at this cohort view, because when we were putting all of these MQLs in one bucket, we didn't realize though, if we then added a layer of fit into this that we could see drastic conversion rates. So, and throughout the funnel as well, because we had all of this tracking in place, and we could see that these low fit hand raisers were not most of the time moving forward into, closed won deals. So we don't want to, our intention is to only pass qualified leads to sales. And so we don't, it's not like we're not passing them, but we are not saying, wow, we had, 100 MQLs, and by the way, like 50 of them sucked. But we had MQLs and we met our goal. We don't do that. That's not cool. We are taking accountability and making sure that we're layering in as many factors as we can to ensure that quality is the key. Quality is what we're looking for. So think about when your marketing team is trying to, increase MQLs, or when your marketing team is trying to understand like how to reach their goals, dive a little bit deeper with them to try and uncover some of this data that at first may make them hesitant to say, oh, I don't, why wouldn't we count these as MQLs? But if you look at the data and you start to break out these cohorts, and Drew will talk about them later too, of how to actually get to that point, you can actually see that if we focus on quality, if we focus on the hand raisers that are a good fit, our conversion rate, our velocity, much, much higher. So we want to put our efforts there versus just trying to hit that number with anything that comes through. And so
I have a
tracking
real
our
quick question based on your last slide with the outreach cadences.
yeah.
Are those triggered automatically, or are the SDRs dropping people into those cadences based on what they see as a follow-up action for recommended follow-up in your campaigns? How are you managing that?
Yeah, good question. So those are automatic. So we have workflows that essentially are sending, like recognizing the fit and recognizing the action, and then enrolling those into the outreach sequence themselves. And so it's hands off for the AE, which is great because we don't want them to spend time on, low fit leads like that. There are in the outreach sequence, like steps, like I would say it's semi-automated. Like there are some steps where they will have to kind of jump in and communicate with the lead, but that's good. It's not that first email, right? It's like once we know that like they actually do want to have a conversation with us.
Oh, okay. And on those, then do you have a recommendation like at the campaign level or at like the lead or contact level that tells the reps which sequence or what content they should use?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, we definitely have.
We have that too. That's why I was just curious of how people are managing it. It's interesting to see that you're doing the low fit automatically.
Yeah, and for a while, we actually were automating all of it too. We were automating our hand raisers, different sequence, obviously, but once we started paying a little bit more attention to like those types of leads and the messaging and doing a lot of testing, we decided to stop automating that one, just because it was easier to have the AEs like spend more time there and that it was justifiable.
Okay. And then do you also do a lookup back into your map to, for instance, hold people out for a couple of weeks if they're in current outreach sequences? And do you sync that data back to your map then as well?
Yeah, all of that. So we have all of our custom fields, like outreach fields, that in Salesforce. So it allows us to see exactly where somebody is, what step of the sequence, if they're eligible even to enroll in another sequence. So all of that data is on either lead or contact layout, and then we can continue to track, and we'll automatically pull people out to, for example, if the email bounces, right? Like this is again like increasing the productivity of your sales team, so they're not having to then go back into two systems and changing statuses and whatnot. But yeah, we have all of that documented on the lead and contact layouts.
Does it come into the map though? You bring it into the map for your like nurture flows to exclude people as well? Yeah.
And it's all mapped. Yep, it's all pushed back into HubSpot. So when I'm considering nurtures, when I'm building lists, when I'm doing segmentations for emails, I can then use those fields for consideration.
Got it.
Awesome. Okay. Yes. So moving a little bit further into the funnel, and we kind of started already talking about this, is like, okay, we all know it can be really difficult when there's many sales reps. For example, if you have a large sales organization, how do we actually know people are doing what they're supposed to be doing? And marketing ops, like, we love control, right? Like, we want to be able to see everything happening. I think are all marketing ops people type A, perhaps.
Yes. Yes. I think the
So-
worst part is if you have an acquisition of a company and you have to deal with another MOPS person that had control. But we all need each
Yeah.
other at the end of the day, right? But
Yeah, exactly. We all need each other. So we started talking about lead statuses, right? Like holding people accountable, which we'll also talk about, to these lead statuses, because this is like, we know where people are in the funnel, and that's great, but like, we have to know, like, there might be multiple things that have to happen within that one stage. So we can't just rely on the larger picture of these lead management stages of somebody being an MQL or somebody being a sales accepted lead. And I think, like, as you progress through the funnel, those like steps within the stages get a little bit more convoluted, because an MQL is an MQL. But you might have a status that says, the type of MQL, or like just something like that. I mean, there's various ways to track that, and Drew will talk about that too. But when we get into like sales accepted leads, you might have please don't do 5 or 6 statuses, but 2 or 3 statuses associated with that stage. And that's one really important thing that, like, I have seen teams just sales teams, like, they don't understand. And so there's this educational component that we have to deliver in order to make sure that we understand that this is the stage and these are the statuses, and within the statuses, here's exactly what needs to happen and why. And if you don't do those things, here's also what's going to happen. So there's implications. But again, like, when we approach it in this larger picture of lead management and why things are so important, it's easier for us to kind of gain that alignment and understanding from sales teams and make sure that they're actually tracking. When they realize, wow, this is actually going to help us make sure that leads aren't being lost in the funnel, that there is a place for everything to go, and there's a tree, a branch for us to go out on, no matter what the scenario is, then that again just kind of goes back to their goal of increasing productivity, increasing the efficiency of their process. Lead velocity, nice.
There we go. So wanted to make sure that we are able to track the speed with which we're progressing through the funnel. So basically this comes down to creating formula fields for status to status incremental math. It's basically built off of the date stamps that you previously built on slide 22. Looking at creating a formula field for status to date. So if you have open leads or unconverted leads, looking at post-qualification or mid-funnel age, leveraging OR and today logic just in terms of switching that. So if you're basically monitoring up to today, unless it's actually been converted, and then you're looking at the date stamp that occurred at the converted date or at the status change date. So creating formula fields for MQL to SQL or new lead to SQL conversion timelines are really, really useful. And then in terms of just reporting on that, it's basic report format, but then using averages, min and max to check the outliers on calculated velocities, and then looking at averages for weekly or monthly MQL cohorts to see if funnel is speeding or slowing. Really just gives you that check so that you can see if there's anything changing in terms of the address, or if processes are actually being followed that should be maintaining that funnel velocity overall. Again, like you could implement those functions within the MAP if you're using that, but there's also the ability to do that directly within the CRM through just some simple formulas.
I'm checking the time, so I'm going to kind of run through these next ones a little bit quickly. So this is just some status examples to give you some ideas of, again, like this is very typical, not very complex. But if you wanted to take this and then evolve it with your organization, this is kind of a great starting point and also helpful for documentation. Our sales team, I mean, like when we decided to redefine some of our stages and change some statuses, like we took them through this workshop where not only were they giving their input, they also were visually seeing everything and understood like what the definitions were and literally reading it to them and say, do you agree with this? Yes, okay, let's move on. So this is really great for documentation. So some of this again is like fairly obvious, like we have to involve all of the key sales and marketing stakeholders. Again, like it as marketing ops leaders, we have such an opportunity to kind of wrap our arms around this and be the champion here and add that kind of value. So involving all of the teams and saying, let's do this together is going to help make that process more collaborative. We try to limit changes, you know, and really be super discerning over like why do we need to make this change, and like have conversations without judgment around those ideas that come up and say, do we really need that though? And we kind of like err on the side of not making changes, but having the discussion, of course. Yeah, so it's definitely better if we can, it's easier to remove them as opposed to try and add them and then work your way back to like an audit and then your data is kind of inaccurate. So it's easier to just like consolidate them. Some of my favorite clients were the ones that had like 15 lead statuses, and I'm like, why do you have all of these? And we would get to go in and like consolidate them. And it's also like, it feels good, right? Like it's definitely one of those things where like, what's the word? I can't think of it, but it's a nice thing to be able to consolidate and clean up your house versus trying to like build it out a little bit more. So yes, consider what are your lead stages? Do they make sense? Do you need to change them? How do you define them? How will sales and marketing engage in them? What happens? What's their responsibility when it comes to lead stages? We do have a few questions here, but I might, unless anybody has something that they want to share or a question, I might skip and save to the end because I know we're running out of time. Okay, so defining service level agreements. We know, you know, SLAs for short, right? Like this is going to allow us to hold people accountable, right? Like it's easy to sit in a room and say, we're going to define all of these things. It all sounds good. Yes, let's put it into place. And then people don't actually follow the rules. So service level agreements help us as an organization, as individuals, do what we said we were going to do. We're busy, right? Like we like to focus on the things that are quick wins. We want to move through things, but these are important steps that need to happen in order for us to be successful in focusing on our one goal of increasing revenue and having more sales wins. So that's why it's really important that we consider service level agreements. And when you're building these out with your team, here are some of the things that you can consider and some questions that you can ask. You know, definitely think about follow-up times and even think about criteria. Like in order for somebody to move from this status to this status, what's the criteria? You know, because you don't want to miss out on that. Otherwise, somebody might just say, oh, I have 24 hours, I'm just going to move it. But you want to say, yes, you have 24 hours and you need to check these boxes. So you need to make sure that those are included in SLAs, not just necessarily follow-up times. Yeah, here's some best practices, of course, and you can adjust, but we know, and you'll see on the next slide, that the faster you move, you know, the more likely you are going to capture that deal. So we like to see, obviously, anything that is as close to revenue as possible be handled as quickly as possible. So those hand raisers that come through, they're like so close to revenue, especially if they are a good fit. So you want to be on top of them. And then you can kind of go a layer out. Like, okay, if we have like what we call natural MQLs that is essentially determined by behavioral combined with ICP scoring, but they haven't explicitly raised their hand, that SLA is a little bit broader. That's like for us, I think 48 hours versus the 1 hour for that hand raiser. So definitely take into consideration different types of MQLs and leads and where they are in their journey and the follow-up time that should be considered. And yes, marketing SLAs will have a slide on that too. We can't just say, like, SLAs are always so focused on sales. So we definitely need to have some marketing SLAs. And there's a lot we can do around that. We can think about when we're recycling leads, when we're remarketing them. Is marketing actually doing anything with them? Are you sending them to a remarket nurture? Like, do we have a workflow in place that's happening there? So thinking about those types of things. If a lead gets passed back, MQLs, obviously, like that's that handoff. So we need to have some marketing responsibility there too. And then, as I was saying, so here's just an example of different SLAs based on lead stage. So you can see based on the goal, you can have those different SLAs associated with them. So a hand raiser is going to be treated much differently than, you know, all other leads. And that's where we might see like that marketing SLA come in, where, okay, it's not a hand raiser, it's not an MQL. However, there is still something that needs to happen there. We're not just adding leads to the database and then doing nothing with them. So that's why, again, the marketing SLAs are also important. And I know Christy left, but like, for example, different types of MQLs you can see here will drive different types of sequence enrollments as well. This slide is really just kind of showcasing, as I said earlier, that reaching out to the leads faster yields higher conversion rates. And then when you can layer in, and these are like, yeah, these are pretty conservative, but when you also layer in like the fit of the leads, so reaching out to a very good lead within 5 minutes yields a 3 times conversion rates compared to 1 hour. But you can also then break that down by like, what about a medium lead? Because do I need to prioritize a medium lead over a very good lead? Do I need to prioritize a low fit lead over a very good lead? So you can break out SLAs, and I mean, they can get really complex depending on how you can segment your database. And the one thing here too is to consider is that like, you have to rely on your data, right? Like, do you even have the ability to say if you have a good lead versus a low fit lead or a medium fit lead? If not, you might need to look more around, okay, how can we better segment our data? How can we better infuse different points of action that will allow us to better see who a lead is in terms of like ICP and that bigger picture. So if I'm moving too quickly, please let me know. Okay, so marketing SLAs, again, we've talked a little bit about this, but yes, so are your leads being accepted by your team? Are your leads converting at a rate that you would like them to? So we're trying to make sure that we're kind of matching the pace. Like, we don't want to see these spikes and dips in the MQLs and SQLs and MQLs going in different directions and things like that. So marketing SLAs kind of help us from that perspective. And again, marketing operations, I feel like sometimes this kind of goes unsaid, or this isn't always implemented when working with the marketing teams. And like, for some reason we get away with it. Like, we have this, like, people think marketing is more responsible than sales, but we still need to be held accountable. Here are just some additional examples of service level agreements. And the difference here is that this is going to talk a little bit more about like the actual criteria. So this lead status is an MQL, here's the definition, here's that ownership, and here's exactly what needs to happen or what will happen. So you're sending the alert, you have to review it, you have 24 hours, and then you have to change the status from this to this. Or if it doesn't work out in terms of like, they're not moving forward, you change the status to this. And if you don't do that, here's what's gonna happen. So this is really easy for salespeople to see, like, okay, if I want to move to this status, here are the 5 things that I need to do. And if I don't do those things, I'm going to get in trouble. That's what they're thinking. It's kind of like, can I swear? It's kind of like a shitty mindset, but because we don't want to motivate by fear, but instead we want to motivate by all of us like encouraging everybody to like hold themselves accountable. Like, you are responsible for this, and that is a big deal, and you can have a big impact. So instead of driving it towards that like fear police hat, you can definitely find a way to have a little bit more empathy around these types of discussions. Which, I mean, they can, nobody likes change, and nobody likes to feel accountable because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to do something wrong. So if you approach it from this empathetic mindset, we can put these things in place without scaring people. And then this is just another like documentation. Documentation is so critical, and I have a slide later that if we get to it, that is just like, all documentation is not created equal. We know that in marketing ops. We know that we need different levels of documentation. We have documentation that says the same thing, but it's for a different audience. Like, this is for sales. This is your decision tree that allows you to see a very clear path of, here are your options, here are where things should go and what you should do in these different scenarios. Our lead management schematic is going to look very different. It says the same thing, but it's going to look very different because it's for a different audience. It's for somebody that is looking at the operational things, looking more technically speaking, versus this is like very situational. Okay, couple more technical plays.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually just here, I'm just gonna cover off on this really quick, some ideas around how you can actually monitor SLA compliance or violation. And then I think one thing to consider is, in terms of specific action, trying to monitor the specific actions and then roll that up and update status accordingly when that full, and that's sort of a challenge, right? Because that's a lot to inventory, it's a lot to keep track of. But if you can eliminate that status update function from the things that the SDRA have to do, that's a major point of service. It's also going to enable better tracking for you in terms of them taking those specific actions that are contained within each SLA. But some ideas around tracking SLAs and how you can operationalize that within the CRM here. Also, looking at the op push counter, because sometimes you get into a scenario where maybe you have a sales leader, or I actually had a CEO once who was all over the lead funnel and would like chase reps if they didn't convert their leads. Which was really funny because like, you're like, well, thanks, boss, I appreciate it. But at the same time, like, it was really, it would create an inadvertent spin up of ops that would then languish or die on the vine, because you would just have all these opportunities created in order to meet the SLAs around, specific movement in the lead funnel. And, one thing that you might want to put in place or consider here is just some ideas around how to operationalize a push counter to see that if those ops then just kind of keep getting kicked down the road, how can you make sure that that gets monitored at least, and it gets escalated to sales management. And then bonus is account-based SLAs, some ideas here, and this is a concept for consideration, especially if you're doing significant account-based motions, is when you cohort and distribute accounts that have that are showing significant sign or likelihood to buy, making sure that those accounts are actually worked and that there's actual action or activity or account penetration actions that actually result in the SLA compliance. And if not, then maybe there's the opportunity to return those accounts to queue, or to potentially score them up again or reroute them, reassign them if need be. So, it's an interesting point, because in terms of ABM efforts, very often you see accounts assigned to be worked, but how often do they actually get worked, and what's the ultimate throughput in terms of those ABM campaigns is another question.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to skip this one because we're running out of time, but I definitely want to get to measurement and metrics. I'm also going to drop our emails in the chat because we're happy to stay on, but if you have to jump, but you have a question, feel free to email it to us and we can connect offline. But Drew, I am going to let you chat through the measurement and metric slides here, and then we might have to skip our tip slide, but they will be included in the deck after we wrap up.
Totally cool. So yeah, just in terms of, the things to look at in terms of, everything we've been talking about building today is to facilitate measurement and metrics. But in terms of the ongoing activity is, making sure that those reports are accessible, making sure that the teams are aligned on which reports should be used, automating those reports, making sure that they're triggered and pushed out when new records come in, or if you have a minimum number of records, or managing all of those aspects is an important part of the equation. Again, you don't want to create too much noise in terms of like pushing reports like every day. If it's not something that really makes sense for people to review on a regular basis, then maybe you don't necessarily like deploy that report on that interval. How and where are you tracking the time to the first touch? We talked about that in terms of SLAs, untouched hand raisers, rejected leads, being able to close that feedback loop, and then also delaying time or managing the time in between a rejection and a potential requalification, and then looking at lead follow-up and also opportunity progression. We talked about that as well. Then in terms of, we actually talked about a lot of the ways you could do this in the CRM. Also in MadKudu, we've got a couple examples coming up, so we'll just jump to those. So time to first touch, we actually look at the activity and seeing, the difference between very good, good, medium, and low. And again, trying to differentiate the reporting in terms of the actual amount of time, so that you can see those averages and monitoring that over time as well. Also, like looking at that cohorted by period of time is really useful as well, just to see the net change or directionality of it. And then untouched hand raisers, in MadKudu, we look at the fact that there's a potential volume a potential value attached to those hand raisers, and we multiply that potential lead value by the items that are not monitored, or not pushed through and touched. So we look at potential revenue lost there as well, and that's something that can be escalated to the sales organization or called out, and then those, and also potentially remedied in the short term as well. Final point here is MQL cohorts, and this actually goes back to accountability on the marketing org, because I think that's something that ops is especially in a position to take responsibility for and potentially enforce. Is when we make agreements around what is considered an MQL, making sure that that stays a certain way, because changing your MQL definitions or thresholds or really like allowing that to get out of hand can be a little bit insane, to be totally honest. So what we recommend is the use of an MQL reason or MQL type field, and then having a set of pick list values that map to the different ways in which something can MQL. And this is to the point that Hannah was talking about earlier as well. So mapping those, and then also it's funny because having things in a pick list can actually be a powerful deterrent for gaming the MQL threshold or criteria, because it's like, well, all right, if you want to like drop the threshold in terms of the score to a certain level, that's fine, but we're still going to say that, well, that's based off of the threshold being X as opposed to Y as the actual MQL reason. So that's something to potentially monitor there if you're using a heuristic model. Also, if you have different methods of scoring, which is something we as a scoring platform run into and we accommodate, is if you have a traditional model and then a predictive model showing the qualification, and then finally consider overlapping qualification processes, just as far as saying, well, it qualifies under maybe a traditional model and a predictive model, so that you can see that there's going to be overlaps, and then you can get definitely like a good idea of your relative volumes, and then that way you don't necessarily like just completely get rid of a certain volume of MQLs when you're not really ramping up to that degree yet. And just an example of kind of reporting around understanding lead status and showing the throughput by rep and statusing, as well as the various scoring that could be involved there, and an idea of kind of like our product signals that we leverage internally as well as for our customers.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say too, like this is a report that we look at every week in our sales and marketing meeting. And I would definitely advise, like as a marketing ops person, to be in those meetings as well. We kind of have, like I cover both roles, so I am there, and this is an extremely helpful report for our sales team. And we go through it. We don't have to go through it one by one because they understand, what they need to do, but it is very, very helpful in making sure that like, here's what we're working on, here's what needs to get done, here's what's outside of the SLA. Okay, if you have to jump, no worries, but we have a couple of tips to leave you with. And again, if you have questions, I apologize we didn't get to live questions, but just too much goodness to share. Feel free to email us and connect on LinkedIn. So I'll quickly go through some tips here from me. Ultimately, like we need, when you go through this journey, like there's a lot of people involved. We have to identify who owns what from like an implementation standpoint, who is just simply like needing to sign off on things and approve. Like I tend to go towards using like a RACI chart for this. So definitely make sure that that is part of your strategy in once you decide to like embark on this journey, or you realize like, wow, we really need to optimize this thing, but who's involved and why. Loop in the people, loop them all in, loop in the tech stakeholders, and also like every key stakeholder from other departments too. Sales, marketing, customer success even. I say customer success because that is literally like part of the lifeblood of your organization, and you have to be working as a team. We tend to leave customer success out, and it's a shame. So they should be included as well. But loop them in and make sure that the process works with your technology and that you are addressing those kind of gotchas up front, because it sucks when you get to the execution and you're like, "Ooh, I wish I would have thought about that. I should have included this person in this meeting earlier on." And then document any workflows, alerts, scoring adjustments, field changes. You're making a lot of changes when you're optimizing your process, and we have a tendency to just kind of like check things off and say, yes, let's go do that. But it's really important that before we implement, we actually write it down first, get it out of your brain, document it. It's going to be extremely useful. This kind of goes into the next bullet, but extremely useful for training, making changes, identifying, like, you know, again, those gotchas, optimizations, all of that. And most importantly, you can package it up so you have a very holistic, you know, process documented. It's all in one place. It's not like, oh yeah, here's this from Hannah's notes, here's this from Drew's notes, here's this, what was that decision that we made? Oh yeah, let me look back at that Slack note. Like, that never works. And then designate a change management champion. This could be you. I always like to call this like the Gandalf of your journey. Make sure that you have a Gandalf, somebody who's like that's a terrifying journey that those poor, what are they? Elves? No, not elves. I don't even know what they are. Hobbits. The hobbits. That was a big journey for these hobbits. They could not have done that without Gandalf. They all had a responsibility, and who is always there, cheering them on, giving them motivation, telling them this is a good thing. We have to do this, and here's why. Stick with it. That should be you, or you and a partner, somebody on that has that like executive purview that can do it with you, and make the change less scary, because you're talking about change, and that is a psychological thing. People hate change, and that is a huge blocker to implementing a lot of these things that we talk about today. And then bringing back the Glenn Gary reference, always be optimizing, always be closing, always be optimizing. None of this is stagnant. So it's ever changing, ever evolving process. As your business evolves, like you have to expect things like lead scoring and qualification and, you know, sales and marketing goals, like they have to evolve too. So, you know, I had a lot of clients that would get angry. They would come back and say, well, we changed this and now we have to change our whole process. Like, why would you set us up for that? And we would have to explain to them, listen, when you have a different goal, when you have a, when you change the structure of your team, when you change systems, like this is not set it and forget it. And I think that especially executive leadership forgets about that. These things need to always be moving. It is like a river. So set that expectation up front. And just a few screenshots for like documentation. Here is what I mean when I say, when you think through all of the alerts that and the workflows that you need to build, get it documented. Get it documented in the sense of like, I know what the workflow is, I know what it's called, I can link to it, I know what criteria is driving it, I know what the action is going to happen, I know who to exclude, who shouldn't go into that workflow. Things like database structure changes, document which fields you're changing, why you're changing them, where they're on the layout, et cetera, et cetera. And then again, just document the process in a variety of ways. These say the same thing. However, it's a different audience. I'm not going to send this to my sales team. They would tell me to quit. They're not going to want to look at this or try to understand this. They should. I would love it if they would, but this is a much more simplified version and much more palatable for them. It breaks it up into steps. It's easy, it's visual, but not in a way that's overwhelming. I like the version on the right because I can see everything that's happening, but I'm also the one building the process. So, okay, Drew's tips with his, just look at how handsome.
like there's an internal joke about Drew says no versus Drew says yes, and those are the two emojis basically. So it's basically the just a few technical tips. First off, use help text and bubbles wherever possible in the CRM. It's funny how far that will actually get you in terms of enablement and helping people understand what things are used for. Establish standard reporting and review cadences. We talked about that a little bit, just in terms of, you know, when things are looked at, when things are swept over, and making sure that you know, you're checking things as you go along. Think about scalable flows and formulas. Avoid rigidity when you can, but also I think it's super important to just have something. So if you do have the capability to implement items within your CRM, within your MAP, just go ahead and do them, get something in there, and without over engineering the process, and then iterate. One point I called out is that sometimes money spent on a customization is better than an additional stack component. Really, like, there are simple solutions that, maybe for a bit of additional expenditure on one particular aspect of the stack is a better way to go, especially for your particular business, than for doing that in terms of like shopping for an entirely additional component. In terms of SLAs and also in terms of monitoring throughput through the funnel, keep marketing honest as well as sales. And you really do have the power to align both of them. And then finally, encourage debate and then agree and move forward. So all of the reporting, all of the metrics should be reviewed. And I encourage you to kind of create that revenue operations, sales and marketing alignment focus within a regular meeting cadence, and then be willing to have that discussion, but come to agreements and then move forward so that you can keep operating.
Okay, thank you so much for staying over, and I apologize, we just had a lot of content that we're excited to share with you. Happy to stay if there are questions. Feel free to chime in if there are, and I'll stop talking so you have the opportunity to do that. Okay, well, our emails are in the chat. Feel free to email us, connect with us on LinkedIn. Here are the emails again, and I believe that the recording will be sent out. We can get the slides out over to the Lean Data team as well. Thank you so much. This was hopefully an informative session for you, and we're always happy to talk more.
Thank you all.